Hit subscribe, like and comment. If you think you can handle the truth, stay with me. The alarm sounded at 4:17 a.m. Inside the Special Housing Unit of America's toughest federal prison, the kind designed for inmates considered too dangerous for any other facility, a correctional officer stopped mid-step when he saw the tray still sitting untouched in the slot. Breakfast had been delivered 3 hours earlier. The tray was cold. Oatmeal hardened like plaster. A boiled egg untouched. A single slice of wheat bread, dry and stiff. In cell 211, inmate Marcus Hale wasn't moving. Hale wasn't a minor offender. He was serving multiple life sentences tied to organized crime operations stretching across 3 states. A man once known for control of territory, control of people, control of money. Now he lay on a concrete slab beneath fluorescent lighting that never fully turned off. The officer called medical. Within minutes, boots pounded against steel flooring. The cell door clanked open. A medic knelt beside Hale and pressed 2 fingers against his neck. Pulse, faint. Hale was alive. But barely. He was rushed through corridors lined with reinforced doors and surveillance cameras. Guards escorted the gurney like they were transporting a weapon, not a man. Inside the prison infirmary, doctors worked in silence. Blood pressure dangerously low. Electrolyte imbalance severe. Weight loss, dramatic. But the part that didn't make sense? There were no signs of violence. No struggle. No trauma. No visible illness. Only malnutrition. In a facility that prided itself on order and precision, malnutrition wasn't supposed to happen. And that was the first crack in the system. The prison itself stood in a remote stretch of land, surrounded by razor wire, guard towers, and miles of isolation. Designed to hold the most violent and high-profile federal inmates in the country, it operated with clockwork rigidity. Every movement documented. Every calorie counted. Every tray scanned before delivery. At least, that's what the public was told. Special Agent Rebecca Navarro didn't buy the isolated medical incident explanation. She had built her career inside the Department of Justice investigating internal compliance failures, procurement fraud, medical neglect, corruption hidden behind federal paperwork. When Hale's attorney filed an emergency petition alleging systemic nutritional deprivation, Navarro's name landed on the assignment. Her job was simple on paper: determine whether Hale's condition was an anomaly or evidence of something larger. The first thing she asked for wasn't surveillance footage. It was the menu. The facility's weekly meal plan was neatly formatted. Calorie counts listed beside every item. Protein intake measured. Sodium levels tracked. Breakfast, 2,400 total daily calories divided across 3 meals. Dinner rotations including chicken quarters, rice, beans, and seasonal vegetables. Nutritional compliance aligned with federal dietary guidelines. It looked textbook. Navarro requested delivery logs. That's when things started to blur. On paper, every tray met standards. In reality, Hale's medical chart told a different story. Over the past 8 months, Hale had lost 37 pounds. His blood work showed vitamin deficiencies typically seen in famine conditions or prolonged neglect. Navarro interviewed the prison dietitian. "We follow federal requirements," the woman said carefully. "Meals are portion-controlled and nutritionally balanced." "Individually?" Navarro asked. "Prepared in batches." "And verified?" There was a pause. "Random audits." "Random. Not daily. Not systematic. Random." Navarro next requested access to food storage facilities. The prison administrator hesitated. "Security clearance is required." "I have it," Navarro replied. The food warehouse sat behind 2 locked gates and a biometric entry system. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered above industrial shelving stacked with sealed containers. Rice sacks. Powdered eggs. Canned vegetables. Bulk protein patties labeled institutional grade. Navarro opened a box of vacuum-sealed chicken quarters. Expiration date, valid. She checked another. Valid. Then she noticed something else. The protein content printed on the packaging didn't match the nutritional reports submitted in the weekly compliance forms. The difference wasn't dramatic, but it was consistent. 3 grams less protein per serving. 5 grams less. 8 grams less. Individually insignificant. Over months? Critical. Navarro pulled procurement contracts. 6 months before Hale's health decline began, the prison had switched suppliers. The new contract cut costs by 18%. The justification cited budget optimization. The supplier was federally approved. But deeper inside the paperwork, a footnote referenced adjusted portion equivalency standards. Adjusted. Navarro ran the numbers. If portion equivalency had been calculated using outdated protein density data, then every tray served under the new contract would be nutritionally deficient, even if it met volume requirements. Inmates would be eating the same amount, but receiving less sustenance. Subtle. Legal, on paper. Devastating over time. She requested independent lab testing of current food stock. The results came back 48 hours later. Protein levels lower than labeled. Micronutrient content inconsistent. Caloric values within range, but barely. Not starvation. Just enough to survive. Unless someone skipped meals. Unless someone was already physically stressed. Unless someone, like Marcus Hale, spent 23 hours a day in a concrete box with no commissary access due to disciplinary restrictions. Navarro interviewed another inmate through secure channels. The man spoke cautiously. "The food's different," he said. "You eat it but you're still hungry. Like your body's not getting what it needs." "Did you report it?" "To who?" Silence lingered. Navarro returned to Hale's medical records. 3 separate complaints of dizziness. 2 documented fainting episodes. Repeated notes recommending dietary review. Each recommendation marked, no action required. Within compliance. Within compliance. She dug deeper into procurement emails. One thread caught her attention. Subject line: isolation variable adjustment. Attached spreadsheet. Columns labeled: cost per tray. Projected savings. Population classification. Under maximum security isolation units, a line item read, reduced caloric density tolerance acceptable within regulatory minimum. Acceptable. Navarro leaned back in her chair. Someone had calculated survival down to the dollar. And isolation units, where inmates had the least oversight, the least contact, the least ability to complain, were treated differently. She cross-referenced weight logs from other inmates in similar housing units. Gradual weight decline across the board. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm individually. But collectively? A pattern. Navarro brought her findings to the prison warden. This suggests systemic undernourishment in high-security isolation units. The warden's jaw tightened. "We meet federal minimums." "Minimums aren't health." "Are you suggesting intentional harm?" "I'm suggesting someone redefined acceptable." The warden didn't answer. That night, Navarro received an anonymous email. No signature. No subject line. Just one sentence. "You're looking in the wrong place. Check the kitchen." Attached was a timestamp. 3:12 a.m. Navarro reviewed security footage from the prison kitchen at that hour. Cameras showed staff preparing early morning meal batches. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the footage glitched. 37 seconds of distortion. When the video resumed, trays were already sealed. Navarro requested raw footage files. The IT supervisor hesitated. "Storage overwrite," he said. "Data corrupted." Convenient. Navarro personally inspected the kitchen the next morning. Industrial ovens lined the walls. Massive vats of oatmeal simmered. Portion scoops stacked neatly. She noticed something near the prep station, an unlabeled container. Powdered supplement mix. She checked the recipe binder. No supplement listed. She asked the head kitchen supervisor, "What's in that container?" "Standard fortification blend." "Why isn't it documented?" The supervisor swallowed. "Because it's not in the official menu." Navarro opened the container and sent a sample for testing. The lab results hit her inbox 2 days later. The powder wasn't fortification. It was filler, starch-based bulk additive used to increase volume without adding meaningful nutrition. It made meals look substantial. It made portions appear compliant. It made hunger quieter, but never satisfied. Navarro stared at the report. If the filler had replaced legitimate protein or micronutrient supplements, then the deficiency wasn't accidental. It was engineered. She returned to the procurement spreadsheet and scrolled further down. At the bottom, hidden beneath collapsed rows, a note. Projected annual savings, $2.3 million. She closed the file slowly. Marcus Hale had nearly died. Not from violence. Not from disease. From calculation. Navarro prepared a formal escalation report to the Department of Justice. Before she could submit it, her secure access credentials were temporarily suspended, pending review. Her office keycard failed at the entrance the next morning. Administrative delay, they told her. Just routine. That afternoon, she received a call from the prison infirmary. Marcus Hale was conscious. And asking to speak, only to her. When Navarro entered the room, Hale looked thinner than before, but his eyes were sharp. "You figured it out," he said quietly. "Figured what out?" He gave a faint smile. "It's not about saving money." Navarro leaned closer. "Then what is it about?" Hale's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're testing thresholds." Thresholds for what? How little a human needs before they break. Before Navarro could respond, the infirmary door opened. 2 senior officials from the Bureau of Prisons stepped inside. "Agent Navarro," one of them said calmly, "this investigation is being reassigned." She looked from them to Hale. "On what grounds?" "National security implications." The words echoed in the sterile room. National security. Over prison food. As Navarro was escorted out of the infirmary, she turned back one last time. Hale was watching her. Not afraid. Certain. And that's when she realized this wasn't just about miscalculated meals. It was about controlled deprivation. But when she returned to her office to retrieve the isolation variable spreadsheet, the file was gone. Deleted. And the procurement contract? Replaced with a revised version, dated retroactively 6 months earlier. Someone wasn't just cutting corners. Someone was rewriting history. And as Navarro stood there, staring at the empty directory folder, she understood one thing with chilling clarity. The food wasn't the crime. It was the experiment. And someone inside the federal system was making sure it stayed buried. By the time Agent Rebecca Navarro's credentials were restored, 3 days had passed. 3 days inside a system that could erase digital footprints, rewrite contracts, and quietly reassign federal investigations without explanation. She didn't waste time complaining. She requested copies of everything, again. Procurement contracts, nutritional compliance reports, internal emails, vendor invoices, kitchen shift logs. This time she didn't rely on the central server alone. She downloaded, printed, cross-referenced, and stored duplicates in an encrypted external drive that never left her sight. Because if someone was testing thresholds, as Marcus Hale had claimed, then the food program inside America's toughest federal prison wasn't a budget issue. It was a controlled study. Navarro flew to Washington, D.C., requesting a closed-door meeting at the Department of Justice. The official response was measured and neutral, ongoing review. No evidence of systemic wrongdoing at this time. But that phrase, no evidence, didn't mean innocence. It meant insulation. Back at the prison, tension thickened. Word spread quickly among inmates that Hale had nearly died. In maximum security isolation units, news traveled through pipes, through coded knocks on concrete walls, through shouted whispers during the few seconds doors opened for tray delivery. Within a week, 2 more inmates were hospitalized for similar symptoms: dizziness, muscle weakness, fainting. Official cause, dehydration. Unofficial reality, their commissary privileges had been suspended. They were entirely dependent on standard meal trays. Navarro requested body weight logs for the entire isolation population. She plotted them chronologically. The pattern was unmistakable. A slow, consistent decline beginning the same month the new supplier contract took effect. But something else caught her eye. The decline wasn't uniform. Certain inmates, those flagged as high risk or politically sensitive, lost weight more rapidly. She cross-referenced inmate classifications. Organized crime leaders. domestic terrorism convictions, high-profile financial criminals, individuals whose cases had drawn international media attention. Those housed in general population units showed minor fluctuations. Those in isolation units showed sustained decline. Navarro confronted the prison's chief operations officer. Why are isolation inmates experiencing disproportionate nutritional loss? The officer folded his hands. Isolation inmates are less active. Weight fluctuations are normal. Less active people require fewer calories, not less protein. He didn't respond. Navarro requested ingredient sourcing details from the new food vendor. The company was a mid-sized federal contractor that had expanded rapidly over the past 2 years. Its CEO had prior defense industry ties. Several board members previously held advisory positions within federal agencies. She requested independent laboratory analysis of food shipments delivered over the past 6 months. The numbers were worse than before. Protein content fluctuated unpredictably between batches. Micronutrients, particularly iron and B-complex vitamins, were below minimum recommended levels in 38% of tested samples. Starch fillers accounted for up to 22% of total meal volume in some trays. But here's what made it dangerous. The meals still met the bare federal caloric minimum. Calories were intact. Nutrition was not. That distinction was technical and devastating. Navarro reviewed inmate disciplinary logs. She noticed that inmates who filed formal food complaints often received minor infractions within weeks: failure to comply, disruptive conduct, unauthorized communication. Small violations. Enough to justify further isolation. Enough to silence them. One afternoon, Navarro returned to the infirmary to speak with Hale again. This time he looked stronger. A temporary nutritional supplement regimen had stabilized him. You said they're testing thresholds, she began. Hale nodded slowly. You ever hear of behavioral conditioning through deprivation? He asked. Explain. He leaned back against the pillow. You reduce nutrition just enough. Not starvation. Just discomfort. Fatigue. Cognitive fog. Then you observe. Observe what? How long before someone becomes compliant? How long before they stop filing grievances? How long before aggression decreases? Navarro's jaw tightened. You think this is behavioral research? I think we're lab rats with federal numbers. That theory felt extreme. But the data didn't dismiss it. Navarro began reviewing archived Bureau of Prisons policy proposals from 5 years earlier. She found a discontinued pilot concept buried in policy drafts titled Behavioral Stability Optimization in High-Risk Inmate Populations. The proposal discussed environmental variables, light exposure, exercise restrictions, and dietary modulation. Dietary modulation. The program had officially been shelved after civil rights concerns. Officially. Navarro tracked down a former bureau policy analyst who had worked on the draft. He agreed to meet off the record. You're chasing something that won't make you popular, he warned her over coffee in a quiet DC cafe. Was dietary modulation ever implemented unofficially? She asked. He hesitated. The argument was simple: extreme inmates require extreme management tools. The discussion wasn't about starvation. It was about reducing volatility. Through nutrition? Through control of variables. Diet was considered one. Did it move forward? He stirred his coffee slowly. Not publicly. Navarro returned to the prison unannounced that evening. She requested real-time observation of meal preparation. At 2:58 a.m., kitchen staff began assembling breakfast trays. She watched as industrial scoops measured oatmeal into compartments. Then she saw it again, the unlabeled starch container. This time she measured. A full scoop replaced nearly a quarter of the protein component in each tray destined for isolation units. General population trays received smaller portions of filler. Isolation trays received more. She confronted the kitchen supervisor directly. Who instructed this adjustment? Standard operational directive, he said stiffly. From whom? I don't know names. You know the chain of command. He swallowed. We were told isolation units required portion stabilization. stabilization. To prevent behavioral incidents. There was an admission, carefully phrased. Navarro escalated her findings to the Office of Inspector General. Within 24 hours, she received notice that her investigation was officially transferred to a joint federal review panel. Translation: buried under bureaucracy. But then something happened no one expected. An anonymous data leak hit an investigative journalist's inbox. Spreadsheets, lab results, weight logs, procurement adjustments. The headline broke 3 days later. Federal Supermax prison accused of nutritional manipulation in isolation units. Public reaction was immediate. Civil rights organizations demanded transparency. Former inmates came forward describing persistent hunger, chronic fatigue, unexplained health decline. The Bureau of Prisons issued a statement denying intentional harm and affirming compliance with federal standards. Compliance. The same word that had nearly cost Marcus Hale his life. Inside the prison, administrators tightened restrictions. Kitchen staff were instructed to cease external communication. Isolation inmates were denied phone privileges temporarily due to security review. Navarro sensed desperation. Then came the escalation. A junior procurement officer contacted her privately. He sounded terrified. "I signed off on the revised supplier equivalency forms," he said. "But the original documentation showed higher nutritional values. We were told to use adjusted baselines." "Who told you?" "An interagency advisory group. They said it was classified." "Classified under what authority?" "National security." That phrase again. National security. Navarro requested documentation from the advisory group. Her request was denied. She filed a formal subpoena through the Inspector General's office. Before it could be processed, the procurement officer withdrew his cooperation. His phone number was disconnected. His employment status changed to administrative leave. Then, 2 nights later, a fire alarm went off inside the prison's storage warehouse. No injuries. Minimal visible damage. But when Navarro arrived the next morning, one section of shelving was charred beyond recognition. Specifically, the section containing archived food shipment records from the first 2 months of the supplier transition. Electrical malfunction, officials claimed. Navarro walked the perimeter slowly. The burn pattern was contained, suspiciously controlled. She turned to the warden. "You understand how this looks?" He met her gaze without blinking. "I understand you're looking for a scandal." "No," she replied evenly. "I'm looking for truth." Later that afternoon, Navarro received a confidential internal memo from a source within the Department of Justice. The memo referenced a classified behavioral research partnership between federal corrections and a contracted defense analytics firm. The project title chilled her. Human Resilience Under Controlled Resource Conditions. Navarro read the memo twice. The study parameters included caloric thresholds, micronutrient variability, and behavioral outcome tracking. The study population description? High-risk isolated inmates within federal maximum security facilities. Marcus Hale hadn't been paranoid. He had been part of a model. And as Navarro continued reading, her stomach tightened. The project timeline began 6 months before Hale collapsed. The very month the supplier contract changed. But the final line of the memo was worse than anything else. Phase 2 expansion pending outcome evaluation. Phase 2. If Phase 1 was isolation units inside a federal supermax, where did Phase 2 lead? Navarro closed the file and stared out the narrow office window toward the perimeter towers. If this was real, if inmates were being subjected to covert nutritional deprivation as part of a classified behavioral study, then this wasn't just administrative misconduct. It was a human experiment. And experiments escalate. Her phone buzzed. A secure message from an unknown number. 3 words. "They know you know." Attached was a surveillance photo, taken less than an hour earlier, of Navarro walking into the prison. She wasn't just investigating anymore. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. If you think this investigation was intense, brace yourself. The next revelation will make even the most hardened observers question the limits of control and human endurance. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.